George Dinda, happy to join this webinar just to discuss matters AfCFTA, which we are very passionate about, because we see that as an opportunity that Kenya can leverage on to increase and enhance our exports and reap benefits for our economy, create employment for our people, our youth, and the women. So we have a great opportunity to be involved in the CFTA. Joanne has made a very good attempt, very well in just bringing up to speed on where we are. Just give you a highlight on what the strategy is all about, what it speaks to, the areas it has identified as opportunities that Kenya can explore within a market, and then also that is in terms of the sectors, and again also look at the destination, the countries where Kenya could be able to export to. So basically that's what my presentation is all about. My outline is as follows. We look at an overview of the CFTA, look at the premise, why we have the implementation strategy, what are the strategic objectives, where are the priority markets, okay, what are some of the challenges that we are facing, then the risks, the mitigation measures, and then finally just a snapshot of our communication strategy. Of course, the implementation strategy has also included a communication strategy on how we are going to communicate it to our different stakeholders, and then conclude by looking at the next steps. To begin with, like Joanne had earlier said, the AfCFTA, the agreement, of course, the history goes back to around 2012, when the heads of state agreed and said that where we are in Africa is not where we ought to be. We are not trading with one another. We need to boost intra-Africa trade. And so they sat down, the heads of state and government, and said, let us develop, okay, let us establish a continental market. And that's where the conversation progress was made till 21st of March 2018, where around 44 member states of the African Union appended their signature on the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. That was done alongside four protocols. There was a protocol on trading goods, protocol on trading services, and the protocol on the rules and procedures of settlement of disputes. And again, there was an additional protocol on the movement of persons, rights of residence, and establishment. Though that protocol is a different protocol from the AfCFTA. So it is not the protocol on movement of persons, rights of establishment, and residence is not a protocol within the AfCFTA. It is being pursued differently. So and that is being pursued by the African Union, and that's what will give people the flexibility to move across the continent. And then, of course, through other decisions, the agreement came into force way back in May 2019, and that is after the 22nd ratification was made to the Bureau of the chairperson of the African Union Commission. And then, of course, again in 2019, around July, there we had the operational phase being launched in Niamey, Niger, where a couple of instruments were launched, where we had the dashboard of the African Trade Observatory, and again we had the rules of origin provisionally being launched as well, and many other things that happened just in a way of keeping the momentum of the AfCFTA. but because of COVID, that was postponed to January 2021. And of course, we can remember that there was a launch of trading in 1st of January. Right now, we are still having the negotiations going on, and Joanne did allude to this. We have some pending issues on rules of origin. We've made great progress. We are at a 6.4. Remaining 14.4%. We have still outstanding issues on tariff offers from member states and customs union that is still ongoing. We still have pending issues on specific commitments on trading services on the 5 priority sectors. And of course, currently, we have around 33 submissions on specific commitments, and we have 41 submissions of tariff offers coming from 4 customs union and member states that are not, or state parties that are not members of any customs union. The 4 customs union include EAC, CEMAC, ECOWAS, and SACU. Now, Kenya is under the EAC, and our initial offer is still under discussion. We're having a meeting. We had a meeting yesterday. We're having a meeting today. We are at a 3.4%, and we hope that in the days to come, we'll be able to bring our tariff offer to the thresholds that have been agreed for in the modalities. So this is basically just an overview of where we are in terms of the negotiations. We have a dispute settlement body that has been established, and they had the second meeting that concluded last week. And this is important because in any given free trade area, we'd expect that disputes will arise, and we don't want to settle our disputes elsewhere. So the protocol provides for settlement of disputes within the continent, and that's what the DSB is important. We've made progress in terms of negotiations on IPR, which are phase 2. So we have the intellectual property rights.
Sorry, George. Sorry.
Yeah.
Are you moving your slides already?
No, not yet. I'm still giving an overview of the CFTA. Okay, I'm going to move my slides. Yes.
Sorry, I thought they were not moving.
No, I'm not yet moving. So I was saying on phase 2 issues, we still have negotiations on the intellectual property rights. Then we have competition policy, we have investment, and of course, we also have e-commerce. So basically, that just gives us an overview of the CFTA upon which our strategy is pegged on. And then why again now do we have this strategy? And of course, the strategy provides a framework on which we will effectively implement the AfCFTA agreement. And of course, Joanne also did mention this, that with support from UNECA, and they've been very helpful to us, we must acknowledge, and TIMEA, they've supported our efforts in terms of developing this strategy. The strategy has gone a peer review again in 2019, and then of course we hope that we'll have finished the strategy, but again COVID happened in 2020 and we were not able to conclude the strategy as we had opted. So we picked up again this year, of course with support from UNECA, and we've had 2 peer review sessions, and of course our stakeholders were drawn from both the public and the private sector. We had, of course, stakeholders coming from academia, the University of Nairobi, Mount Kenya University, and other universities. We made sure that the process is as inclusive as possible. And then moving forward, why is it important to have this strategy? Of course, the AfCFTA provides a very big market. And so the strategy is basically to leverage a deeper integration within the AfCFTA, and of course, be able to expand Kenya's trade and investment in Africa. Currently, Kenya does around 40% of trade in Africa, and we are looking through this strategy that we're able to move it up to higher levels. Of course, the strategy development. This strategy, of course, seeks to generally expand Kenya's export to African sub-region. And of course, that will come through increase in production of goods and services. We also will be able to see consumption of locally produced goods and services. We are looking into increasing our manufacturing sector and value-added exports. Very importantly, the regional value chain, see how we can use
George, we are losing you.
Of the strategy, someone was calling me.
Okay,
the vision of the strategy is to, thank you. I'm saying the vision of this strategy is to make Kenya a leading trade and investment hub in the region. And of course, that will be done through bolstering Kenya's trade and investment. Of course, using the state parties to support inclusive economic growth and sustainable development. Moving forward into strategic objectives, we have 7 strategic objectives, and these have been developed through a robust institutional analysis of our Kenyan productive capabilities. And to begin with, we are looking at how we can facilitate safe, secure, and effective trade in goods and services within the AfCFTA. And this strategic objective came as a result of issues of COVID. We had started doing this strategy before COVID, but when COVID happened, we made sure that now this strategy has to speak to issues that are relating to COVID. And so in terms of this strategic objective number 1, we'll be looking at how restrictions and regulations, how can we then be able to trade in a COVID environment? And so that strategic objective will be addressing those issues in terms of safe and effective trade in goods and services across the continent. We're looking at having interactive portals. Okay, is it possible to have portals where we can trade in the absence of physical meetings? Okay, how can we utilize the internet, like what we are doing now, to trade? We'll be looking at how can costs of trade be reduced. So this strategic objective will be addressing such issues: increase of business-to-business engagement and knowledge of markets, custom standards, and SPS requirements across Africa, reducing costs of trade, and the things like that. Okay, reducing monitoring. How do we eliminate NTBs, increase intra-Africa trade? Okay. All right. So that's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 will be to enhance Kenya's productive capacity and competitive advantage of domestic producers and exporters under the AfCFTA. And so basically we'll be looking at how to facilitate product adoption to meet export market requirements, okay, through market research and product development. We'll be looking on how we can align, taking advantage of the Kenya Industrial Transformation Program and the opportunities that it affords to take advantage of the AfCFTA. So we'll be looking at launching flagship projects. We'll be looking at sensitizing micro, small, and medium enterprises targeted in the Kenya Industrial Transformation Program. We are looking at sourcing of industrial fund for supporting investment and boosting Africa trade. All those issues will be addressed under strategic objective number 2. And then moving into number 3, strategic objective number 3 is about institutional and regulatory framework. This is important. So we'll be looking at how can we increase the institutional capacity of different players in the AfCFTA to take advantage of the opportunities there. So we're looking at capacity building, for example, of trade development officers. We're looking at capacity building of the National Implementation Committee that will be spearheading the implementation of this strategy. All the stakeholders that have been identified by the strategy that are key to the implementation process. We're looking at how we can have, interactions with them so that they're able to understand. There's the issue of regulatory framework, and this is important in terms of trade in services. Realize that this is the next frontier of opportunities that are coming in trade in services, and so you cannot trade effectively without regulatory framework. And so it's important that we be able to discuss and talk about regulatory frameworks and how we can be able to enhance regulatory cooperation as far as trade in services is concerned. We're looking at how we can review and develop capture. Again, in terms of trade and services, an issue of data capture. All right, then there's no data currently. See how we can develop tools of analysis. Language. Realize that in Africa there are 4 recognized languages. We have English for countries that are Anglophone. We have Francophone, mostly in West Africa. We have Arabic in North Africa, and you have the Lusophones, the countries that speak Portuguese, the Angolas and the Mozambiques and the Cape Verde. And so also the issue of language also should be able to be addressed under this strategic objective. Then again, number 4 there, facilitate inclusiveness. The agreement speaks to gender. If you look at article, I think it's 3E, talks about gender equality and bringing opportunities for women, youth, and even persons with disability. So the protocol makes that provision. And to be able to, for us to be in line with that, also we have a strategic objective that speaks into mainstreaming these issues. So we have women and youth, and how they will be involved and ensure that they take advantage of the AfCFTA. So those issues about women involvement, youth empowerment, MSMEs, all of them will be addressed under that strategic objective. And then moving forward to number 5, of course, we want to develop a national approach, increase awareness around the AfCFTA, and that way we have developed a communication strategy that will be speaking into how we're going to reach the identified stakeholders. So we have a very clear communication strategy that identifies the key stakeholders and how they are going to be reached. And of course, every strategy requires resources, financing, and so we have one strategic objective that speaks sustainable development are key. How do we take advantage of this strategy without putting the future generations into jeopardy? So that brings me to the end of this strategic objective. There are 7 of them, and then of course this will be of priority to us. The strategy identifies sectors and destination markets. Okay,
George, sorry for interruption. If those are on your slides, there are participants who are requesting that you project them for ease of interaction and following of the discussion. So if you're able to move
they are in the slide.
Okay, if you're able to move your slides kindly.
I've moved the slides, unless maybe you're not seeing from your end.
Not from my end. Just proceed. Just proceed. Let me confirm with if the others are seeing slides moving.
Okay.
But I can see some comments that they're not moving, so.
Maybe the internet is a little bit slow.
But they're not moving for sure.
Okay. Would you like to share from your end so that I can proceed from there?
Okay, so you said you're on slide number 10. How many slides do you have?
I just 10 more, then I'll be done.
Okay, let's share from our end, then you can let us
fine.
know when to move on to the next.
Okay, fine. I'll stop sharing then.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay, John, are you able to?
George?
Yes.
Just proceed. We'll let you know when I've already shared so that you can direct us on when to move the slides.
Okay, fine. I was saying that now the strategy identifies priority sectors, and these priority sectors have not been identified in isolation. Of course, we are cognizant of the fact that there are other policy documents that have been developed that have equally identified sectors. So what we did is we looked at what other policy documents that have been developed and what have they said. For example, recall that a couple of years ago, go to slide number 10, please. We have developed the Integrated National Export Development and Promotion Strategy, which are identified critical areas where Kenya has potential. Okay. So, these strategies, so that they're able to speak to one another, as identified similar. Okay. And the opportunities that have been identified are in agriculture, livestock, fisheries, manufacturing, handicraft, mining, and mining, oil and gases are the emerging areas. So those are the ones that the strategy has identified that Kenya can take advantage on, okay, compared to the productive capacities elsewhere in Africa. So these are the key areas in terms of trade in goods. Great potential, great opportunities in agriculture, great opportunities in manufacturing, great opportunities in livestock, in handicraft, and of course in the emerging areas of oil and gas. In terms of services, the integrated national export development and promotion strategy are identified around 8 areas where Kenya has potential for export in terms of trading services. And then, of course, within the AfCFTA, of course, we will move into the 12 sectors, but what the Council of Ministers identified were 5 key priorities areas that touch on business, and of course, business including professional services, on communication, on financial services, on tourism and related services. Okay, so under the CFTA, for the first period of liberalization, we are focused on 5 areas. Okay, though the strategy identifies more areas because the CFTA talks about gradual liberalization. Eventually, we will move into liberalizing all the sectors, but priority has been given to the first 5, and that's where our focus is. In light of COVID-19, it has become necessary also to have conversation on liberalization of health services. Though health services was not part of the first 5 priority sectors for liberalization of trading services, but due to this pandemic, it has become necessary to begin, having conversation on how that can be part of the areas that can be considered for liberalization. So there it is. The next slide, you have the priority export sectors and markets. Under agriculture, the next slide, please. Under agriculture, you have tea, coffee, vegetable and pulses, floriculture, tobacco, and then in manufacturing, and of course tea. There's a lot. I did a presentation to the East African Tea Association, and I did, the potential for them in Africa. There is huge potential, my friends. There is huge potential in agriculture. the productive capacity cannot, it's just so wide that if you take advantage of this, I mean, Kenya will be so far away. So there it is: tea, coffee, vegetable and pulses, tobacco, cotton. Then in terms of manufacturing, textile and apparel, we have leather and leather products, plastics, and then metal and allied products. Okay, moving forward, in terms of the export destination, potential, and it has focused on these ones. Ethiopia is a market that we've been looking for such a long time. We are happy that at least there's some breakthrough on the telecommunications. If you've been reading what has been happening, we're also looking into getting into Ethiopia through the financial sector. And so that's one of the countries that the strategy has identified as a key market destination. And then again, there are very serious markets in Northwest Africa, touching on Morocco and Algeria. And happy to tell you that Algeria is the 38th country to have ratified the AfCFTA. So right now we have 38 countries. This is a big thing for Africa. And then West Africa. And if you noticed, North Africa, West Africa, and Central Africa, these are areas where Kenya has no preferential trade agreement with at the moment. And so through the AfCFTA, these markets will be open to Kenyans entrepreneurs and the private sector to be able to tap into those opportunities. So the areas that we've identified, the sectors that we've identified in the previous slide, these are the markets where there's potential to get into. All right. So Ethiopia, Northwest Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, through the African Trade Observatory. We're able to see the market conditions. What are the market conditions in? You guys to get some time and look at it, you're able to see the market conditions in these markets. The next slide basically talks about the challenges and the strategic interventions, and of course, challenges are many. Currently, as it is, we've seen absence of a legal framework. Our trade development bill is still a bill, so that means it's a draft. And so that needs to go the processes, so that it becomes an act, provide a legal framework. Of course, there are issues on supply constraints, infrastructure, capabilities. Business environment is still not very good, so we have challenges on production and supply constraints. We have market access constraints. NTBs are just too many. These are one of the things that are contributing to low levels of inter-Africa trade. Of course, the issues of is likely to access opportunities than men, and so that becomes a big challenge. We have environmental hazards. Currently, also we have challenges on coordination. Okay, and that is because there are a lot of this overlapping roles. Of course, and again, limited national and regional Continental testing capabilities. Of course, in view of the COVID-19, several testing, so issues of recognition. Okay. Then, what are the interventions? The interventions involve, of course, having that trade development bill being an act. Again, in terms of COVID, supporting what is happening currently in terms of the African Task Force for COVID-19. Of course, there are regional initiatives, there are also national initiatives. Those needs to be supported. Looking at how Again, we have to continue creating awareness on the opportunities for the AfCFTA. We have to enforce that are in the strategy. In terms of risk and mitigation measures, the next slide basically identifies the risks that are there and how those risks can be mitigated. Of course, now the first risk under the current times that we are living in are issues to do with uncontrolled resurgence of COVID-19, nationally, regionally, or even globally. You've heard of strains, this strain, the Indian strain. Now here there's another strain, and that is resulting into lockdowns and governmental measures, and so that's a serious risk. And our idea now to deal with that is just strengthening the testing capabilities at the border point. A lot of surveillance has to be done. Okay, of course, then issues of vaccination to be rolled out. Another risk that we perceive is that of increasing levels of NTBs. And these NTBs are the ones that are causing low levels of part of the problems that result into low levels of inter-Africa trade. And of course, we have a mechanism on which NTBs can be reported online, and I think that will be a good area to focus on in terms of eliminating those NTBs. We have to look at how we can strengthen the national monitoring committees, how we can strengthen the national focal points on NTBs, how we can have conversations with the regulators and the private sector on NTB monitoring and elimination. The next slide basically talks about, identifies the narrow range of export products. And this is very true for most African countries, not just for Kenya alone. Our export range is very narrow, few products, few markets. That still remains to be a risk. And so how do we mitigate that? We're suggesting that we need to support diversification of our exports. We have to take advantage of existing programs on incubation and what is happening, the incentives at the special economic zones. Again, low volume of capacity of many exporters. This is true, that sometimes there is a market that is demanding so much in terms of volume, but then we cannot meet. And so it becomes a risk also that we can have such a big market, but then we cannot satisfy that market. How do we mitigate that? See how we can organize our businesses into small economic groups so that they're able to produce in volumes, quality and quantity as well. How we can support innovation and development to increase productivity of our producers and our exporters. Again, we have the risk of tariff erosion. And this is one of the arguments that has been given, that this CFTA will cause on tariff revenue. In the short term, we'll have to lose that, but in the long term, the benefits that will come from trading in the continent will be able to provide surplus that will take care of the tariff losses. And of course, countries or nations will have to think on how they can diversify their sources of tax. Within the AfCFTA also, we have an adjustment facility, which also provides an opportunity or an occasion for countries that are going to lose in the short term to find recourse to the adjustment facility. And that also exists not only just for governments, but also for the private sector. Sectors that will feel hurt by coming into force or trading under the continent can also find a way on which they can be financed to come back to their normal operations. So, and again, there's a threat of illicit trade. And of course, the devastation and the results of illicit trade are enormous and so devastating to businesses. And so we're looking at how we can harmonize regional and continental efforts to tackle illicit trade. We're saying that we need to have a regional approach to this. This just doesn't affect Kenya alone, it affects our neighbors. So if we can have concerted efforts, okay, on how we can deal with this, then that will be a bonus for AfCFTA countries, okay? Of course, again, we need to have training programs Then the next slide, basically, as I come to an end, is on the communication strategy. And of course, like I'd mentioned earlier, the strategy provides a mechanism in which we will be able to communicate it to the identified stakeholders. So to begin with, the strategy has identified around 6 target groups. Government, it's very important that we reach out to the government. Different regulators, different agencies, so that we are reading from the same script, okay? So private sector, government is important because they have to champion an enabling environment for the private sector to thrive and take advantage of the opportunities in the AfCFTA. The private sector needs to be reached out in terms of the opportunities that exist. The women also, the interventions that are there, the opportunities are there, the youth, what type of financing is available under the CFTA, the civil society, and the, of course, external players. So these are the key areas that we will be targeting in our communication strategy. Okay, and of course, also we'll be looking at how we can identify what we call the Cfta Champions. Okay, and these are the people that once have been identified will be able to increase conversation and interaction on the Cfta. Okay, and also we are looking at how we can develop content across all media channels, in video flyers, so that the entire public, the general public, is aware of what the Cfta is. And then my last slide there basically is, what are we going to do? What are our next steps? Okay, as where we are at the moment is we are looking at it. We're doing what we call an internal review. We've gone through peer review. We have technical experts looking at the document. What we're just doing a final internal review to give it a trade language, and then we'll be able to go to the next steps of engaging with the 47 counties. A lot of work I know will go into even profiling the products that are in the counties, so that when we're having conversation with them, it's a relevant conversation. We tell them that, see, you guys, this county has potential in this particular area, in these products. These products can do well if they're exported in this market. So a lot of work will go in terms of engaging the counties, and of course, it is also a requirement that we have to do. Then we're also looking at having a wider stakeholder engagement as we seek to validate this document. And then once that has happened, then we move into the official launch.
You know, a lot of justice in terms of explaining where we are as Kenya in terms of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. I believe this is not the first time I'll be talking to you. I think we have had several webinars whereby I have talked about this particular agreement and also trade facilitation. So I'll just be talking today about trade facilitation and the role of trade facilitation in accelerating our implementation for this agreement. So if kindly you can be able to allow me to present.
I think you can share your presentation, Rose.
Okay, thank you. Just a minute. Able to see it?
We are able to see it. Kindly proceed.
Okay, thank you so much. As John has introduced me,
sorry, Rose, please,
yes?
Please enlarge the presentation.
Okay, just a minute.
Thank you.
So let me know on your end if you can be able to see it. Are you able to see it now?
Yes, it's perfect. You can proceed.
Okay, thank you. As John has mentioned, I'm Rose Rono, Director Trade Facilitation at Kentrade, and Kentrade is a government agency that facilitates international trade through automations of, the single window system, providing an information platform whereby you can be able to find out, if you need to import or export within the country. But most importantly, I consider myself a champion for the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement and an international trade expert. So just what I'll take you through is basically to understand the role of trade facilitation. On this Continental Free Trade Agreement, I won't dwell so much on that because my colleague George has mentioned a bit about that, specific objectives. I'll dwell much on the challenges that we have in implementing the agreement, the relationship between trade facilitation and this particular agreement, and some policy recommendations that we have, but I believe we have been able to incorporate them in the National Implementation Strategy. I sit in the National Implementation Committee with George, who was just previously presented, representing Kentrade as a trade facilitation subject matter expert. So what is trade facilitation? Basically, trade facilitation is simplification, harmonization of international processes, international trade processes. And this came about from a recommendation from UNCFACT, which is a UN agency, which just realized that there's quite a bit of issues ongoing when you're trading between one country and another. And Kenya ratified and signed the World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement, which now provides several articles that Kenya is supposed to comply in order to be able to implement, in order to be able to simplify the trading environment. And that particular agreement is aimed at reducing delays and, making procedures more effective, lowering transaction costs, introducing transparency. When you have systems in place like the single window, then you have less human contact, and then you have transparency, then increasing countries' competitiveness. The World Bank did a study some time back in 2018 to just show the impact of introducing the single window system in Kenya. And this was a system that basically, automated a lot of the international trade process. And it showed that on a yearly basis, the single is saving Kenya 2.5 billion Kenya shillings. In addition to that, it has reduced, paperwork by almost 50%. And basically, if you look at it from the World Bank Ease of Doing Business, we had quite sizable in a more efficient, in a faster way, then this, contributes to the price of commodity that you're buying, or even that fuel that you're buying from the petrol station. It contributes to that if you are able to facilitate a trade. So trade facilitation, some studies have shown that it will help to accelerate intra-Africa trade, which is now at 16%, through reduction of non-tariff barriers, such as unexpected changes in regulation, retesting of goods at destination, immigration barriers, repetitive and illegal checkpoints. You can just imagine the checkpoints that are there from, if to look at it from Mombasa all the way to DRC, if you're moving consignments, a lot of those checkpoints are not, some of them are not even legal. Corruption, when you talk about the international trade process, you cannot be ignored, the factor of corruption, especially when it comes to border officials. And I don't only want to blame border officials. Also, you'll find that the traders also perpetrate the same. Inefficient border operations. In Kenya, we have tried to implement the one-stop border posts, but they have not, they've not wholly taken up. We still have issues whereby at the border of Namanga, you are still required to even if you have taken a test in Kenya, COVID test in Kenya, and produced that certificate, is not recognized on the Tanzanian side. So those are some of the issues that the Trade Facilitation Agreement aims at, at resolving. When it comes to the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, basically, I think George has mentioned this is an agreement, a free trade area that will bring together 54 African countries. Eritrea is the only country that has not yet ratified, has not yet signed, but we have 54 countries that have signed and 38 of them who have ratified. It entered into force May 30th, 2019, and also trading kicked off 1st of January 2021. However, we still have some teething issues. The first phase of the agreement was the negotiation on trading goods and trading services, which is still ongoing. And the second phase of the negotiation, which is yet to kick off, is implementing this particular agreement, because we have Burundi who have not yet ratified the agreement, and Tanzania who have not yet ratified the agreement. So I think their efforts, we are lobbying and doing, doing some groundwork just to push them. I think you saw there was a meeting we had during Madaraka Day. We had the Burundian president visiting us. We also had the Tanzanian president visiting some time back. So those efforts, I think, would be able to bear fruit soon, whereby we can be able to all ratify within the ESC and be able to start now moving in terms of implementation of this agreement. So in terms of the specific objectives, and I'll focus on those that are really key in trade facilitation, eliminating of tariffs that has already been done, because we are working towards, negotiating the rules of origin. So we can say that is already dealt with. But non-tariff barriers, these are those issues that are not tariff related that I mentioned, the multiple checkpoints, the regulatory procedures, the infrastructural challenges. The specific objective of the CFTA is to actually reduce some of these non-tariff barriers, liberalization of trade in services, cooperation in terms of investment, intellectual property and competition, cooperation in all trade-related areas, cooperation in custom matters and implementation of trade facilitation measures. This has been clearly spelled out if you read the legal text of the agreement. So this just shows how important trade facilitation is towards implementing this agreement. Because if you remove the tariffs, we say we are going to remove 90% of the tariffs, then the only thing that is going to be left is how do we deal with each other? How are our laws compatible? How are our standards? Are they compatible? Are we compatible in terms of it becomes very easy? Like, it is like trading between Nairobi and Nakuru. How can we be able to make that happen? And I believe we can be able to make that happen through implementing the trade facilitation agreement, putting in place mechanism for addressing non-tariff barriers, like the CFTA have put in place an online mechanism for traders to be able to report these non-tariff barriers. Also, with more trade, then there are more disputes definitely that are going to be coming up. So there's a dispute resolution mechanism that has been established in the agreement to be able as a Secretary General who is running with implementing this. As Kenya, we are implementing it at a national level, and George has given us the progress. We have already developed an implementation strategy, taken it through peer review, and now it will go to validation to all the sector groups. It's a very good strategy because it has really looked at the areas, well researched, and looked at the areas that you can be able to have comparative advantage as a country, because we want to be the first movers. We don't want to have this agreement on paper. There are many agreements that have been on paper. For example, AGOA, we've not utilized AGOA to its full potential. So we need to make this particular agreement a different agreement, an agreement that will not be on paper, but will be able to move. So some of the challenges I've mentioned, non-tariff barriers are a huge challenge. A lack of value addition. We export our commodities in raw form, tea in raw form, coffee in raw form. We're not doing a lot of value addition, but I'm happy that the strategy that George has presented has addressed this. Also, that colonial mentality, we always feel that we need to be able to export, to the countries outside the continent. But I understand, because when you look at the infrastructure, if you look at how we have been socialized, everything has been socialized to get out of Africa. Now we need to be able to look at the infrastructure. I know the AU has an infrastructural plan, also has an air transport, I think BASA, which will be able to harmonize the transportation rules in terms of air, and also infrastructural challenges, be able to just harmonize and for us to have a collective approach, so that we are not looking at outwards the continent, but we are looking at investing in ourselves. Also, lack of unity between our African countries. We've not been moving in one direction. We've been moving in different directions. Even if you look at this particular agreement, we cannot say that we are all moving 54 of us together in this particular agreement. There will be those who will move faster. There will be those who move slower. There will be those who feel they are going to be taken advantage of. There are those who feel that they are going to be okay with it. So I think we need to anticipate some of these challenges. If you look at the EU, we already have, Brexit. Britain got out of the agreement. So this is a journey that we are starting, and we are not saying that the journey will not have problems. It will have problems, but I think it will be important now to have that African unity to be able to move. Political instability has been a big challenge. Some of our neighbors, you can see Somalia, some of our neighbors have not been very stable. So those are some of the challenges that we will experience, but I believe we can be able to surmount. Also, leadership challenges. You can have the best agreements, you can have the best policies, but if you do not have leadership that are focused on growing the economy, and I'd like to give an example of Rwanda. You have seen what Paul Kagame has done in Rwanda. That approach, the approach towards growing the economy, as opposed to the approach of, a lot of politics, approach to a lot of, I think we have a lot of ethnical issues as a country. So I think it's important that the leaders that we have and the leaders that we are going to choose are leaders who are going to have, the interest of growing the economy, growing the Kenyan economy. So those are some of the challenges that we have. So in terms of the relationship between trade facilitation and this particular agreement, I have already mentioned trade facilitation is very critical because it simplifies those processes. It makes it easier for you to trade like brother and sister. It becomes like trading between one town and another. And the only way we can achieve that is breaking those barriers. It's vital for the realization of, this particular agreement. And UNECA has projected the trade facilitation, which will help Africa increase intra-Africa trade by 21.9% of the total of Africa trade by 2022. That is next. Would be added to the intra-Africa trade. So you can already see they are really good things. However, I think the trade facilitation agreement is still lagging behind. I think we only have 29 countries in Africa who have ratified it. We are hoping that more countries can be able to ratify it, because if we are all able to ratify as countries who are part of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, then we'll be reading from the same template. We'll be expecting the same things from one another. Then the bureaucratic delays, the red tape, corruption, all those we need to be able to deal with it. And automation of systems and implementing some of the articles in the trade facilitation agreement will be able to help us to deal with this. So I think included in the implementation strategy that we have come up with. So I think that would be the end of my presentation. I'll share this presentation. It just talks about some of the provisions. If you look at the agreement itself, it has a provision on, it has dealt with, it has a provision on the protocol of trade in goods in the agreement. And then also we have an Annex 4 on trade facilitation. So you can see that the agreement itself, the negotiators ensured that it has been incorporated, the aspect of trade facilitation. Also, Annex 3 covers state parties cooperation in areas of customs. So we are required as countries who are part of this agreement to be able to cooperate, because customs is normally the biggest, the biggest influencer in terms of movement of goods. So if you have customs cooperation, then we'll be able to move quite a bit fast. Then private sector actors have not been left out, and it has been encouraged that governments should be able to now work together with the private sector. Dispute resolution, I have been able to talk about that. And then last but not least is the policy recommendations that I mentioned. African countries, in terms of ratification, we want Burundi to be able to ratify, Tanzania to be able to ratify. So we should be able to really follow up. And other African countries that have not ratified. Then adherence to the NTB and related provisions in the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. There is an online NTB mechanism that has been put in place. So it will be important as traders that if you encounter an issue when you're trading with this particular agreement, you do not keep it to yourself or tell somebody. There is that platform that you can be able to log in, and then the Secretariat will be aware that these are the issues that are there and prioritize in terms of resolving them. Also putting in place, a private sector involvement. By this, I believe that the State Department of Trade have been involving the private sector in terms of even negotiation, coming up with this implementation strategy. I know KEPS was represented, Kenya Association of Manufacturers was represented, Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So it would be important that the private sector are not only part of developing the strategy, but also part of implementing the strategy. We need to have mutual recognition agreements, especially when it comes to trade in services, whereby if you're an engineer in Kenya, you can be able to work in Nigeria seamlessly. Also, harmonization of standards. We have different standards within the continent. So one of the strategies that will be able to help this agreement work is for us to be able to start harmonizing our standards, even at the regional economic community level within the EAC. I'm part of a project that is trying to harmonize or implement the mutual recognition agreement for engineers in the EAC. So if we had many of such projects, I think we'll be able to really move in terms of this particular agreement. Also, infrastructure, I've talked about it, political goodwill, natural implementation strategies. Kenya is very ahead because we already have a strategy. It just needs to be validated. Also, we need to measure our trade facilitation reforms. What gets measured, gets done. So if you can be able to continue measuring, I know the World Bank Ease of Doing Business was suspended. I think we will be able to. It will be important to see what internal mechanisms can we be able to come up to be able to measure, in terms of how we are improving. I know the Shippers Council of East Africa have the Logistics Performance Survey, which is an alternative tool. We can be able to see, how we are moving in terms of our trade facilitation, progress. Publishing and availing information. Kentrade has been very good at this. We have the Information for Trade platform, which you can be able to get information about trading, export and imports. You can be able to log on to that portal. And not only are we documenting, we're also looking at those processes. If processes are long, for example, we found tea had around 99 steps in terms of somebody has to go through those steps to be able to export that product. And we were able to simplify those steps to around 40 of them. So capacity building in trade facilitation, we continue to do that, and trade policy, special differentiation or treatment of least developing countries. George has mentioned that there is a facility for those countries that feel that they are going to lose, and also private sector. So I think those are very good things that are there as part of this agreement. So I think I'll stop there because my time is up, and welcome any questions. And I hope I was able to do enough justice to that topic of how trade facilitation will be able to accelerate the implementation of this particular agreement.
I think I won't try to summarize what George and Rose have taken us through. I mean, quite elaborate things. I think the first thing was that in early January, just like everybody else, I was quite excited for the fact that, the formal kickoff for this was supposed to start. And obviously there was excitement around in the continent and outside. And many people had expectations, of course, their calculations by UNECA and a couple of other scholars showing what the advantages of a trade area for the African continent would be. But even if you leave the quantification aside, because they have so much assumptions, I think the idea that Africa or countries in the African continent needed to have freer trade between them, or to liberalize trade and to have a formal trade structure among them, is just self-evident. So that's the background upon which we at the Institute of Economic Affairs specifically, but I think also I have an interest in this matter. I'd like to confirm as well that, yes, we'll speak to George and to Rose, and both of them have confirmed that they have no objection. So at the end of this meeting, the presentations will be circulated so that all of us could review them much better and make notes, I mean, and get the views. So George took us through the 7 strategic objectives, basically asking about what's the implementation strategy, and he's spoken about the strategic objectives of those in the implementation strategy. I won't go through all of them. Interesting. I'm just wondering whether all of them are compatible with others, because some of them are related directly to trade, some administrative issues, but nevertheless. The thing that I found very interesting is there's an emphasis on priority sectors and markets, which means that for Kenya, there's a view that part of what the strategy should achieve is to try and expand geographically the access to markets, especially for exports. And the second part is basically for specific products. And I find that peculiar. Perhaps George will let us know, is that how this gets done? Because here is value chains across the continent or across the region. I find these too detailed in terms of basically almost an administrative document about what are the products that Kenya wishes to expand, services, and into specific areas. That's quite peculiar for me. And in my view, it means then that just basically it's a replication of rules that existed hitherto, but right now just governed under the AfCFTA. And that I found quite a bit surprising. And the second point that I found quite surprising is, and perhaps George and Rose will both comment upon it, is, so while we are talking about the implementation strategy, it goes beyond trade policy objectives and actually start to address industrial policy, which is related to the point that I spoke about. I don't know why this is so. Perhaps there's a big logic to this, but my thinking again would have been, as you stated, there's an expectation that by the end of 2022, there'll be a 21% expansion in trade across the African. I think I assume that's a trade in goods across the African continent, which would be extremely welcome, especially because that would facilitate part of the recovery from COVID and the effects of the pandemic. And the second point for me is that basically, as a student and a classical liberal, one of the ways that I think about it is that if we accept that trade in itself or rather trade and liberalized trade serves both, of course, it's welfare enhancing and it's as an end in itself. I'm just wondering why we are constrained with specific industrial policy concerns at this point, especially because we've spoken about the fact that those industrial policy concerns are some of the reasons why African countries in general have never been able to reap from mentioning. I think both of you mentioned a focus on non-tariff barriers. That seems to be a problem for this continent specifically. And I hope domestic policy concerns will not necessarily lead to raising up barriers, because those barriers seem to even be a problem within the ESC, which is one of the more advanced, I use advanced advisedly, of the trade blocks within the continent. So I think more elaboration about the non-tariff barriers and how to actually reduce them systematically, to detect them, to reduce them systematically is welcome. And then the final one, of course, are institutional models, which is basically dispute settlement. That too is quite welcome. So in general, you've given us some of the contents, the principles that will, strategic objectives that will inform, and Rosa's re-emphasized for us why trade facilitation is an essential part, and I think it's important for this continent. I think both of them speak to the strength of what this strategy would be. I still don't have it in my mind, except with the 7 strategic objectives that you've spoken about, what the strategy would look like, and perhaps you should have given us a view about when this strategy is expected to come out. So all of around will the presentations be circulated? I think the presentations will be circulated because there's been no objection from either George or Rose, so we'll place them on our website. But if you send your email on this chat box, we'll be able to send that to you too. There's a question from Victor, and I think this should be George, but even Rose could answer it. So it says, what are the strategies in place to conduct the EAC Special Economic Zone policy negotiations in order to take advantage of the Special Economic Zone program within the EAC partner states in order to explore opportunities that come with AfCFTA? So basically, I think what this question leads to is basically, because the AfCFTA was formed in principle from the 4 main trade blocs. It's interesting that the strategic objectives are actually still being handled at country level. I think it's understandable why. But Victor here is asking whether there's scope or space, or whether George knows if within the EAC, this Special Economic Zones policy is being integrated with AfCFTA. I think that's one question. The other question comes from Yvonne Nyokabi, and she says, this is a question to Rose, could Rose elaborate a little more on the strategic non-tariff barriers that are under discussion and how these are important for Kenya? Rose, I hope you got that. So basically, you could elaborate a little bit more on the strategic non-tariff barriers that are under discussion and how these are important for Kenya. And then Rutendo, again, will ask, will implementation of trade facilitation measures also be able to assist with regard to digital trade in Africa? So a question about linking all this back to digital trade. So that again would be for both of you. And Isaac, there are some countries that greatly incentivize production of goods. Do we have a game plan to ensure fair competition, considering the effect of reduced production costs and the advantages? I'm not too sure about this. I tend to be very cautious when I hear talking about trade liberalization on the one hand, and then fair competition, fair trade and fair competition on the other. I'm not too sure I understand how compatible they are, but maybe George can. So we'll take this first set of questions. I'll start by asking Rose to answer first. So Rose, please give us your comments. And then in the next set of questions, I'll ask any of us to just use the chat box, rather the menu bar, and you can raise your hands and I'll point back to you and you can ask your question in your own voice. So let's start with Rose, the couple of questions that were sent to you, and then thereafter we'll come to George. So Rose, please go ahead.
Thank you, Kwame. And I'll tackle some of the questions. The first one, I think, was on the strategic non-tariff barriers that are important for Kenya. We have quite a number of non-tariff barriers. We have issues to do with the congestion at our ports. We have issues to do with our regulations are not harmonized. So you'll find that one government agency is providing, several government agencies are providing a license for a particular good. There's issues to do with our infrastructure. We do not have, infrastructure that integrates us into the continent or even into the EAC. So in terms of our railway system, in terms of our road network. So those are some of the issues that really prevent us from being able to maximize in terms of intra-Africa trade. So most of it is concentrated heavily on our processes, customs-related processes. That's where a lot of our non-tariff barriers come in. And then also we have the capital-intensive, which are now our infrastructure, which will require a lot of investment and long-term outlook in terms of resolving some of these non-tariff barriers. So in terms of how we are looking at it as a country, there are several forums which non-tariff barriers are being addressed. We have the Mombasa Port Charter Community, which is a committee that looks at the non-tariff barriers that are affect players at the port. We also have the Border Control and Coordinating Committee, which is headed by the Ministry of Interior, looking at issues that are there at the port. We also have a committee that is based at ICD Nairobi, and looking at the issues that are based, of traders who are clearing their goods from ICT and also at the airport. So there are quite a number of committees. We also have the most important committee, which is the National Trade Facilitation Committee, which looks at all these issues, which is there at the national level and also there at the EAC level. So mechanisms are there for us to be able to look at the non-tariff barriers that are affecting us. I think it's just about strengthening them. It's just it's about having work plans that are, and people being held accountable to ensure that those work plans are are implemented. But in terms of mechanisms to be able to address these non-tariff barriers, they are there. There was a question that addressed on if we have a special economic zones policy in the EAC, and I'd just like to speak on this. We were in the process of coming up with an EAC trade policy, which will contain all aspects, including the special economic zones policy. But I believe George can be able to comment on that. So this is something I would say that is a work in progress. In terms of digital trade, I'll speak on what we are doing in terms of trade facilitation at the region. We have the custom systems, related systems. There is a project that is being sponsored right now by the EU, which will bring together all customs related systems. So the standard systems, the single windows, the custom systems together, so that we are having that seamless interaction and exchange of information between players at the ESC level. And I believe also there is a protocol, or in the second phase of the negotiation, e-commerce has been, of the negotiation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, e-commerce has been given prominence because of the realization of that e-commerce can be able to speed us very fast in terms of realizing this particular agreement. So that is in the second phase of the negotiation. I cannot be able to comment much about that because the negotiations have not yet been done on that particular. In terms of fair competition, we have the Competition Authority of Kenya. We are one of the few countries in Africa who have such authorities that are looking out for competition. And competition is also another aspect that is going to be negotiated in phase 2. So in the negotiations, I believe we will have protocols. We'll have to be able to agree as a continent. How do we want to be able to mitigate or ensure that there is no unfair competition amongst ourselves? Thank you.
All right, thanks, David. Sorry, George.
I must confess that I missed part of your submission, Bonakwame, but I did hear, just joining back when you did mention something on competition policy and the issue on ACZ policy. Now, let me just at the outright let you know that right now one of the outstanding issues on rules of origin is dealing with issues to do with the SEZ, the special economic zones, and how goods from those schemes will be treated in the continent. There are some countries that are arguing that, come on, these people have got special programs, and so allowing those goods to enter the markets without customs will be deemed as unfair competition. There's another people, so there are a lot of argument, and so and part of our position in Kenya is been to look at what is our SEZ policy saying in the first place, because we have an SEZ policy, and when we looked at it, we realized that it has to go through an amendment, and that's what we are pursuing at the moment. But then also there are certain aspects of our negotiations at the Continental Free Trade Area that require a regional approach, and so I'm just saying that yes, it will be put into consideration what the EAC says as we move into negotiating issues to do with the special economic zones. So I think it's important that we take that approach, not only just for this particular policy, but even on investment and other areas where is of interest. But we'll ensure that the Kenyan interest is put in place first. That's why we are negotiating this thing. There are areas go that way, the protocol does provide, then going that way, instead of waiting for the EAC, we can reap more benefits. So, but just to answer the colleague that I said that will be taken into consideration. There are a lot of things that we are doing at that regional level because like even you must have seen in the presentation, we're beginning from where we are. We are protecting our market first where we are, but as we do so, we are looking at markets elsewhere. So what is within the EAC, of course, will be protected as we look for market elsewhere. Then that's what I wanted to say on ACZ policy. But again, in terms of competition, my colleague Rose has nailed it. We have a competition authority, and then also we have a protocol. So I know some SMEs sometimes get worried that is this protocol for the big boys only. Say no, we have a competition policy protocol that will be negotiated and will ensure that the interests of the SMEs are also taken care of. So this is just a bit that I needed to add on what my colleague Rose has answered on that. And then also we have other internal mechanisms of which we'll be able to activate to protect our local producers. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Rose and George. I'll ask for anyone who has, if you have your hand up, I'll basically, if you use the menu at the top to raise your hand, I'll point to you and then you can ask your question. But in the meantime, because I haven't seen any, I'll ask a question from Piranto, who said, so that's one. Yep. So that's basically the only one that I see. Yeah. Can I have any other question? Anyone else with the question? All right. Without those questions, then I was just George. You missed the point I was making with. Okay, there's one more question. Sorry. Yes, Dak. Thanks, Dak, for being here. So there's a second question, which is one of the excellent slides where George discusses challenges, including the absence of a legal framework. Does this refer to absence of a legal framework to implement AfCFTA? If so, in which areas might this be most urgent beyond special economic zones just mentioned? Would it be standards, tariffs, services, investments, dispute settlement mechanism? It would be great to elaborate more on this if possible and to explore the opportunities which may emerge by fixing the legal framework in targeted areas. So, George, I hope you had that. And then there's Emma. Emma Gishui, you have your hand up. So please just switch on your camera and then you can ask your question to either George or Rose or both. Go ahead, Emma. You have your hand.
Typical Wanjiku. When I compare the cost of just consumer goods from the market shelves, the imported ones are cheaper actually than the local ones. And one of the things that KAM and other manufacturers have spoken about is that the cost of electricity, energy, is very, very high here, meaning then that our goods then end up being very expensive, and you find even stuff, simple things, even from places like Spain and all that, where there are no trade agreements, they are cheaper. And when I listen to George, we are still having a typical academic approach to these AfCFTA. It's very academic. I think it's high time we got granular and addressed things or issues that are making the cost of production in Kenya high, and we cannot achieve industrialization if we are going to continue talking about the cost of doing business, electricity, infrastructure.
come to Rose. George, you have a couple of questions, one from Jack, and then one from Emma, and I think Rose too has a question about the NTBs, right? Okay, so let's come back to you, George.
Thank you. I've listened to the question, and Emma is raising very serious concerns there. Of course, issues to do with, and that happens. You'll find that products from elsewhere in our shelves are slightly cheaper than those that we are producing here, and that is because, and we mentioned that the strategy identifies this as a constraint, and has identified interventions, strategic interventions on how we can deal with that, and that is quite clearly elaborated on our strategic objective 2, where we're talking about enhancing Kenya's productive capacity and the comparative advantage of domestic producers and exporters under the AfCFTA. It's only that maybe because of the time constraints, we cannot get into much deeper conversations on it, but changing. Things are changing. We are improving in terms of creating an enabling environment. There are a lot of reforms that are happening. There are a lot of projects that are happening in infrastructure, in logistics, and if you just check, not even from our own statistics, from the World Bank statistics, on the ease of doing business, something is happening with Kenya. The numbers, we are improving. Of course, we also acknowledge that there's a lot that needs to be done, and we hope that through concerted efforts from everyone else, we'll be able to see and ensure that Kenyans take advantage of the AfCFTA. So that's what I have to say to the comments that have been raised by Emma. But then coming to the other question on the legal framework, what we mean to say here is that we have a national trade policy, okay, and then that will have been followed up by the enactment of the Trade Development Act. So when we talk about lack of a legal framework, it is in terms of the Trade Development Bill, okay? That's what we mean. Otherwise, in terms of the AfCFTA, the AfCFTA, pursuant to Article 2.6 of our Constitution, has already been domesticated. So it forms part of our laws, and so we might not need to do any other law to domesticate it. Kenya being a monoist country, whatever agreement we sign internationally automatically becomes Kenyan laws. That is in the Constitution, Article 2.6. So, but what I meant was that the Trade Development Bill needs to move forward from a bill into an act, okay, so that all trade development activities are properly coordinated. Currently, as it is, there's a lot of duplication and overlapping. You find a lot of trade event activities in different organizations, and so that bill seems just to consolidate some of these things and then have a proper coordination mechanism. All right, Kwame, unless maybe there's another question that I've forgotten. I think those are the two that I captured.
All right, thanks. Yes, you did. Rose, there's a question about non-tariff barriers.
I didn't hear the question because I think I had answered the question on non-tariff barriers. Was there another question?
Yes, you remember Doug asked questions about what part of the AfCFTA have pending issues, and among the things he mentioned was that is it the dispute settlement mechanism and all that, and I was thinking you could elaborate on that. So
okay. So that's not to do with non-tariff barriers, but maybe I think the question that he could be asking is how the negotiations have been structured. The negotiations were structured into two phases. The first phase is the trade in goods, and then trade in services. That is the phase that is nearing completion right now. The second phase of the negotiations is going to have competition, is going to have also intellectual property rights, is going to have investment, and also e-commerce. So those are still pending. The negotiations have not started on that. So I think George can be able to shed more light on when they're expected to start. But as of now, we are still focusing on negotiations on trade in goods and trade in services.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
George, you want to say something on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to, if that specifically, I was referring to the dispute settlement mechanism. With that alluded to this, we have the board being established. Of course, we just coming from a second meeting of the dispute settlement body last week. And so it is still in the preliminary stages of being established. And of course, this is part of the protocol on settlement of disputes was signed, and it is in force together with the agreement. Like Rosa said, yes, these are things that needs to be concluded in phase one negotiations. Of course, we had a deadline on the conclusion of the tariff offers, the rules of origin, and the specific commitments on trade in services in June. As it is now, it seems that deadline might not be met, and so the negotiations will have to continue. Maybe towards, I mean, more time. We have to seek extension from the heads of state and government. At our level as negotiators, we don't have the authority to do that. We can only just request. And so when that is granted, I'm sure then we'll be able to conclude the negotiations. But a lot of progress has been made. Like I mentioned earlier, we have 41 submissions on trade in services. I mean, on trade in goods, that's the tariff concessions. And then we have 33. We have 33 offers on trade in services. And so what we are doing now is that we are analyzing them so that we can generate our requests. And we are, of course, working with the stakeholders in the private sector to give us their comments on this. And then at the EAC level, also we are negotiating. In fact, we have another meeting beginning at midday in the next 15 minutes to see how we can bring our tariff offers to the agreed thresholds in the modalities. The other issues on investment, on competition, but then the substantive negotiations are going to begin, I think, effective after in July or so. Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to add on to that, Kwame, in terms of the dispute resolution mechanism. If you look at the dispute resolution mechanism for the CFTA, largely has been borrowed from the WTO dispute resolution mechanism. But I think now customization, there's a lot of customization that is being done to just avoid some of the issues that we have seen that have affected the WTO dispute the resolution mechanism. I also want to add that at the EAC, we are coming up with a national regional implementation strategy for the CFTA. So those are some of the things I think was important that we mentioned.
All right, thanks, George and Rose. Now I come to the last round of questions. So I'll ask. There's one question from Melody. Melody is our colleague at the IEA. So this you could answer when you answer and make your final questions. But she's just asking George. Could you confirm when the national implementation strategy will be ready and available for the public to review? I think you can make that known. In the meantime, we have Piranto Olemosian. He has his hand up, sorry. So please ask your question. Just switch on your microphone and you can ask your question.
Hello. Hello.
We can hear you. Just go ahead. Just ask your question, please. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Piranto Lemosian from Naropil Enterprises. I just wanted to ask a question to Mr. George. When he was talking about the volumes in terms of production. So I'm just wondering if there is any linkages or platform where you guys can advise micro and small enterprises to look for support to be able to have more volume. For example, our venture is determined mainly on volumes of honey that we produce. So I'm just thinking about others like ourselves in the agriculture sector. Thank you.
The strategy will be out, and any other comments as you make your final comments. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Kwame. That's a good question that's coming from Piranto. Now, in the reality of governance structure now, it was so easy for us to have interventions and field days where we would have conversations with SMEs. I remember a couple of years ago when I was at the district, both in Kisii and Busia, we used to have sessions with the enterprises, the SMEs, and we had scheduled meetings with them every night. Now, a week, I think we'll do even 3. And then what we'll do then was we would carry ourselves, government officers, pick up agricultural officers, pick up industrial development officers, pick up micro small enterprise officers, and then we'll have sessions with the SMEs. So we'll do business clinics for them, and then we'll have follow-up. But now what has happened is we are in a different reality where we have a devolved system. And so linkages have remained largely in the counties, right? Now, you'll find now the agricultural extension officers, like for example, now industrial officers are in the national government. Trade has been developed, but then there are no officers there. So it's been a little bit different, but we are still working with organizations like the KEPROBA, export agency, export promotion agency, that has enormous activities that in their database. Then they're able to get in touch with you and let you know, maybe find interventions for the areas that you're seeking help in. So basically, that's what we do at the national level as we are now. But much of these activities on leakages and reach out has been left with the counties. So our work here at the trade is to capacity build and to provide technical assistance to the counties. Then they are able to reach out to these people. But in terms of the AfCFTA specifically, we are, like I mentioned in our communication strategy, we are focusing on targeted groups where we can reach out to them and understand what are their needs. And from that assessment, we are able to design intervention mechanisms. It means doing training for them. So that is part of what we will be doing moving forward. I don't know whether that answers your question. It's more of trade facilitation. Then in terms of when this document will be ready and out, that I cannot authoritatively say now. We hoped, personally, I hoped that by end of June, we'll have had a document. But again, we have not yet finalized our internal review. And the moment we do so, we'll be able to notify the general public, and probably this document also will be able to be put outside there on the website for all and sundry to view.
All right, Rose.
Thank you, Kwame. I think for me, I think I'll just give my part on this because I don't think there was any other question. And since I think I'm talking to a group of economists, because this is the Institute of Economic Affairs, I think it would be important for us to be able to also not only look at what the government is planning in terms of the national implementation Can we be able to do research and, maybe do partnerships with Cfta and like institutions to be able to just see what the impact of implementing this particular agreement on the different sectors that we have in Kenya? So that in terms of even our national implementation strategy, we are having strategies that are backed up by data. So if you look at some of our presentations, a lot of what we are quoting for research that has been done by UNECA, has been done by UNCTAD, done by other people. So for me, I'm really craving for research that has been, done by our economists. We have, we have very good economists like Kwame in Kenya. So I think for me, that would be my parting shot to ask you, what is your impact, you as an economist, to this particular agreement? What knowledge can you add to us as implementers in government to be able to sharpen our focus even better when we are doing these implementations? So that's my parting shot.
Kwame, just
yes, go ahead.
I'd seen some question that was touching on I think on youth and women, and I just wanted to say that the commitment of African countries to gender equality, women empowerment, and youth development, especially under the AfCFTA, is clearly demonstrated in the agreement. For example, like I mentioned earlier, if you look at Article 3.E, it underscores the importance of gender equality for the development of international trade and economic cooperation in the region. And it talks about promoting and attaining sustainable, inclusive socio-economic development. Okay, that's gender equality and structural transformation. But then also, if you look at the protocol, for example, for trade in services, that's Article 27.2, Part D, it talks about referring to improving export capacity of formal and informal service suppliers, okay, with particular attention to SMEs, all right, and women and youth service suppliers. So the agreement as it is very keen, and I know because even the SG himself has talked about this. He's very passionate about the SMEs. He's very passionate about women. I'm looking forward to having a protocol that addresses issues to do with women. It's been proposed in their structural, in the organization, their structure. And so I'm very sure that the interests of the youth and the women are properly being taken care of, and they'll be given special attention, not only just at the highest level at the AfCFTA, but even for us here in Kenya. It's something that we are looking at, and we're looking forward to engaging with them moving forward. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rose and George. Thanks for giving us highlights and also for these elaborate presentations, and we hope we have your permission to circulate them. This has been an enduring question throughout. So what we'll do is, at the end of this, obviously, we'll provide a link, but also for those who have their email addresses, we'll send to you the presentations later this afternoon. And obviously, the only thing we'd like to ask is basically to honor our presenters by observing copyright rules. Obviously, if you quote from it, it would be useful if you actually gave, you highlighted the source of this, or rather you cited it appropriately so that you do not violate, intellectual property regulations. So that's one. The second point is that I'd like to thank you both for the opportunity to do this. I think we'll have to, at a later time, when the strategy is completely published, we'll have to come together to do to review it once again. And I think one of the things that you've made clear to us is that there's a big opportunity, as Rose said, for Kenyan professionals as well, working with your office and also with others who are interested in basically promoting free trade on this continent, or more liberalized trade on this continent, to work together. So yes, I'll give you my own undertaking that at the Institute of Economic Affairs, we are ramping up our trade program. One of the things that we think is that AfCFTA is going to be a big deal in Kenya's, but also the regional and the continental development trajectory over the coming generation, perhaps. And so looking at it, trying to provide highlights here, but also creating public education around it, but also studying it more clearly to see what opportunities exist is something that we give you our undertaking that we'll do. And we'd like to make ourselves like the think tank in the country, for which obviously AfTA would be a big issue, and for which we try to provide questions, but also to provide negotiating positions, and also highlighting some of the achievements of that. So thanks for giving us that challenge. We'll step up to it.